أعزائي المشاهدين، رحبوا معي بالكاتب الأمريكي بروفيسور ديفيد سوليفان. David, thanks for being our guest tonight in the Fake Show.
Oh, my pleasure to come on. Thank you so much for having me.
David Sullivan, a poet and author. Also, he teaches at Carmelo College. It's in California, right?
In California, it's near the coast, so we're dealing with the fires right now. But so far, we've been spared. We do have some friends who have lost houses to the fires.
I know that one of your books is The Seed of Pomegranate. It's about the war of Iraq.
Yeah, this is a copy of it with artwork by an American Iraqi photographer who lives in Arizona.
This book published on 2012, right?
That's when it came out.
And you worked on this book at the same year?
So I wrote it after talking to my students. I had students who were coming back from having served in the military in Iraq. And so I began to write it to try and understand their experiences more and the things they were telling me. But as I got into the writing, I realized I needed to understand the Iraqi perspective too. So I then began to befriend Iraqi artists and poets and others who would teach me about Iraq. And so half of it is in Iraqi voices and half of it is in US voices.
Also, there is a book of translation from the Arabic for Iraqi poet Adnan Sair. Bombs have not breakfasted yet. What an interesting title.
That's actually a line from one of his poems.
Bombs never breakfasted in Iraq.
He was going to call it Selected Poems, and I said, no, we should have a catchier title.
And how you met Adnan Sair?
So when I finished this book, I realized I really wanted an Iraqi to give me some words for the back cover. So this is Adnan's quote. I sent him the book. He read it. He wrote this wonderful piece back to me. And then a month later, he sent me some of his poems. And he said, I like what you're doing. Can you translate mine with my friend Abbas Kadim? And so Abbas would give me an English approximation. And then I would play with the words and try to get it into English that sounded like a poem and send it back. And bit by bit, Abbas and I created this book together. And then I got to visit Adnan in London 2 summers ago. And I got to meet him and his wife and have dinner with them and talk about trying to do more poems.
Oh, so when you published the book, you never met Adnan before.
He was in London, I was in California.
Interesting. Interesting. Someone may wonder, what left of poetry, novels, and literature in general, after all this madness we live in addition to the crazy social media? Also, they say in your books, poetry and war, like Beauty and the Beast, dance together as perfect partners.
Mm-hmm. And I think it's even more important to slow down, to pay attention to each other, to do things like write poems and novels that can't be just taken in quickly, that can't be adapted to social media, because they force us to look at the human connection. And the only thing that's going to be able to right the balance in our mad world, I think, is our belief in each other and our belief that human connection and literature can still matter.
Do you think that poetry can fix something now?
I think it can fix our hearts and it can open us to other people's perspectives. Right now, the US has turned its back on Iraq because we don't have as many soldiers there. But we did a terrible thing and we need to keep paying attention and assist in any way we can. I know poetry is a very small thing to do, but I can at least listen to my Iraqi artist friends and try to co-translate my Iraqi poet friends so that US citizens will be better educated.
Well, David, as you know, we are a group of aliens making a fake show. So we are very happy that you agreed to take such a risk and meet with aliens. جبت لكم اليوم مؤسسة جاسوسية بالمنطقة. I just told humans that you are the most important spy in the Middle East. You are an American. For Iraqi people, an American always translates into a spy.
And hopefully I can be the good kind of spy
that
finds out things that the public media doesn't tell us in the US. And that's why I rely so much on my Iraqi friends to educate me, to send me photographs, to send me their poems.
Well, that means you are an active spy.
Yes, currently spying.
As you know, it's the spy season in the Middle East, Egypt, Iraq, and everywhere. Also, you spent a year in China, almost a year, right?
I spent a year there on a Fulbright scholarship, so I was teaching in Xi'an, the ancient city of China.
Well, that's what spies do always, David. Teaching here, teaching there.
You have to have your access point and your cover. And you are under observation yourself.
Yes, I know. Here I am cooperating with a spy.
One of the jokes I like, you've probably heard it before, is how does every Iraqi joke begin? By looking over your shoulder.
Ah, that's a good one. Well, in Iraq it could work just like that sometimes. You shoot someone. Oh, I don't know. They told me he's a spy. I saw him with Americans. Or I saw her in the US Embassy. Just like that.
Mm-hmm. Well, and when I talk to the soldiers, my students who have been soldiers in Iraq, they said they could not tell. They didn't speak Arabic. They didn't know the culture. And so they couldn't tell if somebody informed on someone, whether it was legitimate or whether it was lies. And it was very hard for them to make decisions about who to arrest. And, reading about what happened in Iraq, we did a terrible job of understanding the culture and the language and making good choices because we never knew who was telling us the truth or not.
But people may ask, what makes some American spy interested in the Iraqi culture?
I ask myself that. In some ways, I think it's because my country did a terrible thing. I was protesting against the war before it started in San Francisco. When I began to hear the stories, my students began to come back who had served there. They talked about how they had gone thinking they were doing something right and often came back thinking they'd done something wrong. And I realized I needed to go beyond what the media told me to try and understand better what had happened in Iraq and what was wrong with my country that we could do such terrible things under the pretext of doing good.
That's interesting because you never been in Iraq at all.
I keep getting invited. I would like to, but when there was a reading on El Nabi Street, these last 2 years, they've asked me to come. But I'm a teacher here. I'm a father with 2 teenagers, and it's hard to get to Iraq. But at some point, I have to. I need to work on my Arabic, and I need to travel to Iraq and meet my friends there.
You wish to learn Arabic so you can talk to the people of Iraq in their native language?
Yes, I really should. I have my Arabic cards, so I learn bit by bit, but it is very slow.
And which word do you think you can spell it in a perfect way?
Oh, there is no word I am perfect. I know that.
At all?
Kibbutz.
What's that?
The bread?
Khobuz.
Yeah, I still can't do it. Kibbutz. Inshallah, I will learn someday.
Well, this is perfect. Inshallah.
Oh, it's such a wonderful phrase that we need everywhere in every language.
There is no translation in English for inshallah?
In English, we have just adopted the Arabic. So people do say it now, but they didn't translate it. That we just simply say the Arabic and people understand it.
But how you can't translate poems? We know that poetry is the most difficult in any language. And you don't know Arabic.
That's right. So when Adnan first asked me, I said, I can't do this. I don't know any Arabic. And what he said was, talk with Abbas. And Abbas is good with both English and with Arabic. And he will give you versions that are close to finished. And your job is to find the poetic language that will communicate these ideas. And at first, I wrote them and sent them back, and Abbas would say things like, oh, you totally misunderstood this. You have to write it this way. And then sometimes I would come up with a phrase. He said, oh, that's better than I had. That's closer to what I really meant. So it has to be a negotiation, I think. And part of understanding other culture is to be able to listen and be open to it. So in that back and forth with a co-translator, I get taught. And often I get taught a little bit of Arabic because they say, you have to understand this word. And bit by bit, we create a poem together. So I don't think of them as my translations. I think of them as co-creations.
Have you seen other novels or poetry written by modern Arab writers?
And bit by bit, we are getting translations of both novelists, short story writers, and poets in the US. I cannot tell how good they are, how well they are translated, but I know that reading something like The Corpse Exhibition or Frankenstein in Baghdad, those have been very powerful books for me to read and to help me understand better Iraqi culture.
Also, there's many Iraqi writers in the US, like Sinan Anton.
That's right. And Dunya Mechel is out in Arizona. She's a poet friend of mine. I went to New York about 7 months ago and met Faliha Hassan. I've also met interpreters that worked with U.S. soldiers who are now living in Iraq and talked to them. We're actually, one of them is trying to write a memoir with me.
What you don't know that Iraqi people are all poets.
Yeah, I'm getting that feeling. And the depth of poetry, as I've had to read backwards to understand more about the Arabic poems and the changes that came when you went out of metered and into free verse. It's kind of astonishing to see how steeped in poetry Arabic people are and how much it's an active oral tradition. It's not a dead art. In the US, you're thought of as very strange to write poetry. Why would you write something that no one will read?
David, why do you think they always talk about poor translation in the US? They don't say that about France or Britain.
That's true. And I'm not sure why. I think there is, among literate people in the US, there is a fascination with other cultures, with travels, with other language. There's a large part of the US that doesn't care very much about other cultures, unfortunately. But I do think that there is a rich history of translation, particularly among poets, and a real interest in what poetry from other cultures can teach us.
David, when you see the whole world talking, well, the main topics are always about politics.
And soccer.
Yeah, and soccer. Doesn't this scare you as a poet?
It fascinates me. It challenges me. It demands that I open up and learn more. And I think that is what it means to be alive, is to move outside your comfort zone and to take on new challenging things. I had trouble finishing my book because I didn't believe I could write the things I was writing. But as I sent out the poems and I heard back from some Iraqi friends who said, oh, you've captured this event in my life. Or my US soldier friends who said, can you use my name on that poem? I began to feel like I had said something that was useful. But it is always scary. I'm writing now another book about Iraq and about the protests in Tahrir Square, mostly about Baghdad. That's where a lot of my friends are, some in Mosul and other places. And I'm going even further, I think, because I'm mixing in this new book co-translations I've done with living Iraqi poets whose English is good enough we can work together, and artwork that Iraqis have created. Like Shirwan Baran, I'm using some of his pieces, and writing about that art. And then sometimes trying to take on the voice of an Iraqi in English and try to capture something. So it's scary to do, but I feel like it's something I'm drawn to do. And it's a way I can honor my Iraqi friends.
People are different around the world, but we all use the same language against our governments. We see protesters in France, Iraq, Hong Kong, and of course in the US after the murder of George Floyd.
Yes.
How do you explain this similarity?
I think the capitalist global economy has denied individuality and has suppressed our rights as individuals. And that goes for democratic governments like my own. It goes for regimes in other parts of the country. It goes for Chinese government and the suppression of individual voices. But I think there's a growing movement to question the assumptions of global capitalism, the exploitation of workers, the mistreatment of women, and begin to demand some structural changes. And I don't think that's limited to one's own culture. In fact, I think it grows strength from seeing what's happening in Tahrir Square, seeing Iraqis who said enough is enough and the kind of corruption in government can't be tolerated. And it goes for my own country when Black Lives Matter has people on the street saying enough is enough. The systems of injustice are tilted in the favor of certain groups and against others. And we can't keep tolerating it.
Well, we know it was a terrible scene when we all saw the murder of George Floyd. Some people justify such a crime until now.
Oh, yes. And we've known our history, but it's rarely been taught in schools. And my students now, students in college, are more aware than they ever have been of their privileges and of the privileges denied to others. And now they're willing to fight for them in ways that I don't think they have before.
This crisis still exists in the society, no matter how many people try to educate the community. For example, someone like Jon Stewart, he always talked about the problems of the Black community in the United States.
Yes. I think because the movies, the TV shows, the social media has so impacted us with stereotypes, simplistic cardboard cutouts of what it means to be Black in the US. And there hasn't been a lot of interaction between people of different cultures. And you cannot get over stereotypes without interacting, without going through that discomforting place of realizing what someone else has to suffer through. But I do think there is an opportunity now where we could make some changes because the awareness is so high.
There's a problem in the US society even after a Black president?
And he was biracial. He had a white mother and he had a Kenyan father. So even just to say him Black, it's too simple. We live in a more complex world and we should start talking about a more complex world.
Well, that's what they say when we talk about a problem in the US society. They say, oh, there was a Black president. What do you want more?
The structural changes are much deeper than electing a Black president. And even as a Black president, what he faced was politicians who blocked him, I think simply because he was Black. He was not that liberal. He was quite conservative.
He wasn't that liberal.
I think so. We had more drone strikes under Obama than under Bush. He had more military sold to other countries. Yes, he was socially liberal in some ways, and he did some great things. I'm not going to discount that Obama has been a good president for us.
And what about now?
Compared to now, is we can't go there. I don't think I can hold it together. But hopefully in November things will change. I think we have to start dealing with the injustices of our society and begin to work to change them, and that has to be collective. We cannot trust politicians to do it. It has to be people on the streets demanding change.
We just talked about the murder of George Floyd and how some people justify this crime. But it's not just in the US. In Iraq, like the murder of a young girl, successful civil activist, they killed her in the south of Iraq, in Basra, few days ago. And people justify that crime publicly on TV, comments, because it's okay, she was an American agent. She was a spy.
Well, and I think, and I have various friends in Iraq talking about this, that during times of unrest, it's easy for people to create extreme views and to go backwards instead of forwards. So the militias, the increasing treatment of women unfairly, unequally, the suppression of women's rights and independence. I think it's easy to go back to that in times of unrest and change, because change scares us. But I think it's crucial. I mean, Iraq was the most literate, well-educated, in some ways more open and progressive of Middle East countries, despite the fact that Saddam Hussein was a terrible dictator and a persecutor of his people. But he did preserve education and other things. And I think there's a worrisome trend to go back to what's called traditional, but in some ways I think of as repressive governments and social ways and social norms. But I also hear from my friends, too, there are a lot of people on the streets, the women who created a tent in Tahrir Square where they could be together and feel safe, that they still wanted to protest, that they wanted to have their voices heard.
Because people still have a dream.
They still have a dream. And the dream is of an Iraq that is liberated, that is free, that is educated, that is connected to Europe and other parts of the world, and that reclaims itself as an amazing country. I think that's a crucial dream to keep hold on to, despite the voices of.
As long as we talk about Saddam Hussein, do you still think that democracy is the answer for everything? We see some thinkers like Noam Chomsky or Slavoj Žižek disagree with that, or sometimes they hold exactly the opposite view.
Well, what they are against is this notion of forward progress as global capitalist increase. And yes, I'm absolutely convinced that Chomsky is right, that what we need is to begin to rethink what progress means. By progress, I don't mean greater consumption of goods and production of goods. I mean that we progress in terms of thinking ourselves more holistically, that we deal with climate change by radically changing the way we consume things in our world, that we see the interconnectedness of different peoples in different countries, and that we use social media not to be manipulated by people who want to sell us things, but to truly be able to listen to each other and understand each other. That same social media, which I disagree with sometimes, has allowed me a window into Iraqis' lives that nothing else could. I can chat with you using Skype, and we can be talking about Iraq. And if we wanted to, we could, if you had a friend in Iraq we could talk to, they could be here too. That has the potential to radically change the way we meet, greet, and understand each other. And that's what I mean by progress, that we take back those means of connection and use them for our own progressive agenda.
What do you think, David, when you see, after 17 years of political process in Iraq, backed by US, of course, and you see young people in the streets calling for a home? That was the motto of October demonstrations. We need a home, نريد وطن.
Well, and the Palestinians have been fighting even longer. But like you say, I don't think you give up the dream because there are many obstacles in the way. The African American people in the U.S., how many years have they been dealing with, inability to get jobs, to get bank loans, to be treated fairly, to buy a home where they want to? And yet, if you talk to them individually, they'll often say, I still believe in change. I still believe we can have a different United States than we have had.
But still, things are different between Palestinians and Iraqi. In Iraq, you're supposed to have control on your country, your government.
Mm-hmm. Oh, yes. And I think when we invaded Iraq to remove Saddam Hussein, we could have invested heavily in Iraq and in the people of Iraq. Instead of trying to impose a government from outside, we could have really listened to Iraqis. But I think we didn't go in to really improve Iraq. We came in to remove Saddam Hussein and try to get someone in our favor who would help us get access to oil resources. And I think that short-sightedness means we didn't help Iraq, and we didn't get oil resources either. It was foolish, and it's that capitalist, globalist, short-term gain mind that injured an ability. We actually could have helped Iraq, and we chose not to. We chose not to invest in that. And to really help, we would have had to educate our soldiers in Arabic. We would have to have them understand the culture better. And we would have not just soldiers, but people, architects, construction engineers, social workers, psychologists. If we'd invested in that kind of Iraq, it would have been probably a very different picture. You can't trust an 18-year-old boy soldier to try and help improve relations in Iraq. That's not going to happen. They're too young. They're too inexperienced. They don't know enough. So I do think there's ways in which you can help another country, but you have to listen to the other country, not try to impose your will on it.
David, I know that you saw a lot, and I'm sure that you read a lot about the history of the Middle East. Do you think that the diversity of Iraq's population is the problem? Some people are attracted by the idea that diversity is the problem of the whole Middle East.
I think always that diversity is a strength of any culture or group. It's true in nature. When you look at forest systems, it's at the edge of a forest that you have the most active life, where you have, the edge of places. The same thing with the ocean. I think the same thing with cultures. It actually is, diversity is your strength. The diversity of the US is one of our biggest strengths. What gets in trouble is that diversity is difficult. It challenges you. It introduces you to new languages, cuisines, ways of being, social norms. And you have to be in discussion to figure out how to live in harmony. I agree that discussion is sometimes discomforting and difficult. But I think the richness of Iraqi culture is that at one time it had, a Jewish minority population that was accepted. It had the Yazidi in the north. It has the Kurds, as well as the Sunni and the Shiite. And my friends have often said we were good friends with the Sunni family, even though we're Shiite, until post-invasion, and Saddam too encouraged animosity between groups. But I think in the long run, it is the diversity that is going to be the strength of any country, and making that diversity all feel included and part of the country, the political process, and the social norms.
David, we agreed that this interview will be short. What do you say to the young people of Iraq? People staying in the streets and public squares like Tahrir Square since October 2019.
What would I say to them? That despite the severe repression of your efforts, despite the poor education you received and the collapse of the educational system, despite the backward sliding, that Iraq and the Iraq people have a tremendous sense of heart and belief and kindness towards others. And that if you hold on to that and not give in to anger and rage, that you will change your society and make it better, and it will become your home again.
Well, David, after these words, that you are getting us all in troubles. You make us all look like spies. This is a spy's advice.
A global spy network is necessary. May we all be part of it in that radical sense of overturning those institutions of power and subverting what they're trying to do.
David Sullivan, thanks for being part of our show tonight. I wish to meet you again in the future, and we all wish you the best, especially health, as long as we are all under COVID-19's attack.
I appreciate it so much. It's wonderful to talk to you.
Thank you, David. Thank you.